Okay, let's make sure that the PowerPoint here pops up. Just last Tuesday, we got to witness an organization that represents over 1 billion people follow a centuries-old succession planning process. Why? Because they want to maintain their values and give hope for the future. Now, I would suggest to all the companies out here that just like the Catholic Church elected a pope, that you come up with a succession planning process to maintain your values and increase the sustainability of your organization. Oops, I'm away from the mic.
Where do you take that one?
Okay. So, the idea here is not to cloister in the Sistine Chapel and wear funny robes, but the idea is to come up with a process. This is not going to be rapid fire as much as the last few, but I'm going to go pretty quickly. So if anybody wants a copy of this PowerPoint presentation, just go to thesuccessionsolution.com and view it. All right. Ben Franklin once said, the only two things certain in life are death and taxes. When it comes to business, I would suggest to you it's death, taxes, and succession. Right? So let's level set. What do we mean by succession planning? Because lots of people talk about it in one form or another. It's not your will or your estate plan. It's not selling your business. It's not sticking assets into a trust. Those are forms of succession planning actions, but I believe succession planning in any organization is the transfer of three things. And we talked, I had all these speakers come up there. It's the transfer of knowledge, the transfer of management, and possibly the transfer of ownership. But I would argue you can't transfer management unless you transfer knowledge. Right? So that's how I view succession planning. So why do I want to be bothered? I got so much other stuff going on in my life. I don't need this aggravation, right? Well, I'll tell you a few reasons why you want to be bothered. The Boston Consulting Group solicited a number of investment bankers, and they found that the investment bankers told them that a company that had a defined succession planning process increased its value by 1 to 2 times. The other reason you want a succession plan is when you leave, you want to feel comfortable leaving as opposed to, is everything going to be all right? You're going to have some peace of mind. And this is a challenge for many business owners and CEOs and leaders. This is probably, and you'll see later, one of the biggest reasons why there's a failure. That you don't give the next rising generation of managers or owners an opportunity to prepare. I would argue it probably takes 5 to 10 years to find out who that next CEO is, general manager is. And my argument is, wouldn't you want to find out sooner as opposed to later that you got the wrong person? So you want to start early. Obviously, if something happens to you, I have represented a gentleman who fell off a cherry picker working with some sign. He was in a coma for 30 days. He owned a company. He lost the entire company because no one could act on his behalf. It was tragic. The good part is he did come out of the coma and he started a new business. Tax plan. If you have some time to plan, you can save yourself some taxes. You know, whether or not you stop taking a salary and start selling your stock, whether you want to convert from a C corporation to an S corporation, and I don't want to get into the weeds, but you certainly can save some money by doing some tax planning. And then create certainty for your business. You know, I interview lots and lots of employees of closely held businesses. And by the way, we're going to talk a little bit about family business in case we have some family businesses there. The number one comment when I ask them, what would you like to see have happen with this succession plan? What do you think their comment is? I just want to know what they're doing. I need certainty, because without certainty or uncertainty creates anxiety. And try to recruit somebody when they say, well, what's going to happen to the next week? Why don't we be able to decide that, right? Or maintain something. So there's a terrific book by Ryan Holiday It's called The Obstacle is the Way. He's quoting Marcus Aurelius, one of the great Stoics. And Marcus Aurelius basically says that you can't avoid these obstacles in your life. You must take them on as a challenge. They are the way. And if I do anything differently than most succession planning consultants, it's this, is identifying the obstacles. You know, what's that old saying? If you sweep a problem under the rug, all you got is a lumpy rug, right? By the way, if I can tell a joke, I'll raise my hand so you can maybe feel it. Thank you very much. So what are some of the emotional obstacles, right? Well, the first one that I see lots of times, the stakes feel so high. I mean, you have an awesome responsibility for those who run organizations. Not only the employees, but their families. You can't get it wrong. Failure cannot be an option. The other one is planning for obsolescence, right? So one of my original clients who said to me, Brad, my concern is I'm going to go from he's the guy to who's he. This is a real issue for people. There's conflicting interests. Your board may want you to pursue an individual. You think another person is better. Or in a family situation, you know, you have 2 or 3 children that want to be involved in the business. Your spouse wants you to decide. This can be a real issue. You can't ignore it. Lack of experience. Look, you know how to run your businesses 1,000 times better than I do, right? I've just seen this movie so many times before. Many business owners, they just don't know how to start. They don't know where to begin. I'll give you a copy of that book later on so you can get some direction. That wasn't a joke. That's a tough crowd here. All right. Thank you. So if those are some of the obstacles that you typically see, what are some of the financial and legal? So, you know, when it comes to succession planning, like, I can't do succession planning. I got to sell this company, and I'm sorry, employees. The other one is you remain personally liable. I'm not kidding you. Last night, I'm sitting on the couch. I get a phone call from a gentleman who sold his accounting firm to another individual. And he said, hey, Brad, he says, I just wanted to correct. It's in the name of the company, but I was a personal guarantor. This was 2 years ago. Am I still liable? I said, yes, you are still liable. Well, what am I going to do? Well, you need to talk to the guy you sold the company to, right? This is really hard. Once you're on a bank debt, whether it's a guarantor or not, it's really hard to give up. I can't get the value I need to retire, so I have to continue to work, right? And there's a lot of organizations like manufacturers reps. They make a lot of money, but they can't sell it for the value they need. So they can't get it. Again, these are just some of the obstacles. Loss of a valuable customer. You know, I represented a client who, a manufacturer in Butler County, actually Catalyst helped us out a little bit. 80% of their business came from one client. And they said, you don't get a succession plan for pouring your business. Now that's an obstacle because trying to sell a company that 80% of the business is from one client. The tax obligations are too low. I can't afford it once I look at the taxes. All right. So some warning signs that you sometimes see out there. In a family situation, you've got family feuds. And I have to tell you that most close-scale businesses, there's some family related, even if there's just one owner, right? Because you've got spouses. Conservative management fails to innovate. And we'll talk about this a little bit. The great book called The Innovator's Dilemma. When things are going well, people don't want to change. What's that old saying? I hate to hear. Why don't you do it this way? We've always done that. And the problem is when the rising employee, the rising leaders want to do something different, the senior guys don't walk the boat, right? You've got non-key family employees, they perceive no opportunity. Hey, I am not going to go work for your daughter. I'm not going to work for your son. Right? These are some of the warning signs. The loss of a key business relationship, which I just talked about, the manufacturer of the public company, right? And no prepared successor. Before you walk out that door, I once heard a speaker mention that once a CEO reaches age 60, he or she should become a teacher for the next successor. Right? So some family issues, I mentioned family issues, I want to go through that quickly. These are warning signs. There's a family feud. We got incompetent family members, right? And you've got these family members, you got to do something with them. And they think they're entitled to a job. I work with a very, very large billion-dollar company. A child who's in law school comes to the in-house counsel who works for the company and says, I'm going to have your job in 5 years. Not a real smart thing to say, right? By the way, it's no longer here. There's no process for hiring family members. If there are any family businesses involved, I would suggest you create some type of policy so that little Johnny or little Susie doesn't think they can just walk in the next day and have a job. Right? And equal versus fair. I could spend an hour on the subject, but I'll just be real quick because we're dealing with manufacturers who are smart people when it comes to math and science. Equal is what? It's just a math equation. Fair is subject. So some people say, I want to be equal because that's fair. Well, not necessarily. And so you got to sort of keep that in mind, certainly in a family situation. And then even non-family, inside and outside owners. Right? What do the outside owners want? They want a return on their investment. What do the inside owners want to do? Typically, they want to reinvest. So these are some of the warning signs. Here's a statistic from PwC in a family situation. Most family businesses want to keep the business going generation to generation. Only 26% have a documented plan. Right? So, I want to make sure I'm staying on time. I think I'm doing okay here. I suspect most of you have seen this statistic. I have a little more insight. So, family businesses only survive 30% of the time from G1 to G2, 15% to G2, and 3% to G3. Okay, we've heard that statistic, but I'll give you another one that'll blow you up, right? In 1958, a company on the S&P 500 lasted 61 years on the S&P 500. What do you think it is today? Everyone take a guess. 18 years. It's really, really hard to maintain a company. Most of that deals with innovation and competition. So in family situations, it's really, really hard. But anyway, there were these two guys that they did a study over 3,000 businesses worldwide, primarily family owned. 20 years ago, the value was $15 million or more. So today, you got $40 million. And here are the reasons they said there was a failure. 60% of the time, it was due to a lack of trust and communication. Trust is, no one's going to steal my lunch, but, hey, Bob, can you have the report on my desk on Monday? Absolutely. Monday comes along, where's Bob? He's out cold. I can't trust him, right? 25% of the time, it's an ill-prepared successor. And only 15% of the time, it's due to a technical tax or legal issue. I am a former CPA, I am a lawyer, I was disappointed when I heard this, but really the reality is, most of our business people, they hire lawyers and CPAs to deal with this stuff. My comment to you is, if 85% of this failure rate is in your control, why wouldn't you try to control it? Right? So what they said, these authors said, hey, if this is in fact the case, 70% of businesses fail, this is why they fail, how are the ones that get it right? What do they do? Well, what they do is they found a process. I started with the Catholic Church. They have a process. And those families and closing down businesses that followed a process had a much, much greater likelihood of success. The Economist did a study on an organization, I thought this was really cool, in Europe. It's called the Heineken Association. In order to be involved, a member of the Heineken Association, the company has to be a minimum of 200 years old. It has to be managed by a descendant of the company, strong financially, and the family must own a majority interest. What do you think the economists found when they studied the members of the Heineken Association? The common element was they have a written plan that addressed ownership and management changes. I know this is, I tell this to people all the time. This is simple, but it's not easy. We all understand the difference between simple and easy, right? It's simple to come up with a process. It's really hard to go through. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And then Cornell, who does a lot of work with closely held businesses, they found that if you have a documented plan which you execute on, only 16% of the time is there a failure. All right, so I'm doing pretty good here. So I have, this is my book that I published in 2019. You get on Amazon. That is the shameless plug for the book. And it's a strategic planning process. Keith Cunningham wrote a terrific book called Down the Road Less Stupid. I read the book after I came up with that process. But I thought it would be helpful because what Cunningham says is strategic planning is real simple. Here's how it works. You identify where you want to go. You identify where you are. You identify what's in your way, because if there's nothing in your way, you'd be there. You build a machine, you turn it on, and see how it works. Right? So I believe so when I wrote this book, it reminded me of the book, you gotta be old like me, a book called What Color is Your Parachute? Right? Someone will recognize it. And What Color is Your Parachute is 2 books in one. One, finding out what you want to do in your life, and then 2, finding a job to fulfill that goal, right? And that's what this book's about. It's about what the process is, the traps for the American process. So I want to talk to you about my process, right? So the first step, and I have a roadmap that I use when we do a succession planning process. I say, what are the core values? Because we are motivated by our values. If I say, hey, I need you to be at work at 9 o'clock in the morning, and you don't value timeliness, and I do, there's going to be a problem, right? So we identify our values, because when there's a conflict, we'll look at our values. Then, what's our vision? And the Bible says, where there is no vision, people will perish. So if I pull up in the car, your driveway, and I open the door and I say, jump in, what are you going to say? Where are we going? Thank you very much. You've got to give direction to that next generation. By the way, if you have to sell your company, you sell your company. But most people want to continue. And then why? And Simon Sinek wrote, first begin with why. You got to have the rationale for that. Then, in my book, I talk about how I hate going to the mall. I don't know where anything is. Most business owners are terrific running their business, but they don't realize what they have already in place. Whether there's more than one shareholder, is there a shareholders agreement? What do the bylaws say? Am I personally liable? So when I go to the mall, what do I do when I walk in? I look for that big block, and I look for that red dot that says, this is where you are, right? And so that's the second step. Just like Keith Cunningham, just like I said, we now know what our vision is, and we know our values, how we're going to treat one another. We now know where we are. What do you think the next step is, right? You got it. We have to identify the obstacles. I have to sell the company because I need to retire. I have no family member that's competent. I have no employee who's competent. I've got severe customer concentration because I believe if you list your obstacles, there will be your opportunities for success. Then we say, okay, it's kind of like a SWOT analysis, right? What are the strengths? I'm not going anywhere for the next 5 years, as I like to joke. The longer you wait to do succession planning, the fewer the options you will have, right? And then I say, all right, if these are our obstacles, and these are the strengths that we have to rely upon, what good things will come from it? Well, our ability to recruit and retain employees might be one. I can exit, right? So that's kind of the foundation of the succession plan. By the way, I should have put in 6 steps if you didn't remember the slide. The next stage is I call the mission stage. So Bill Gates once said, most people overestimate what they can do in a year. They underestimate what they can do in 10. So if you go to a business owner and say, okay, well, we're going to work on a succession plan, and you're going to be gone in 6 months. They're going to freak out. Or if I say, hey, Bob, can you run a marathon in a week? They'll probably say, no, Mr. Marathon. But if I said, hey, Bob, if I gave you 3 years to run a marathon, You think you can do it? Well, 3 years is a little easy. So what you do is you take this big step back, whether it's 3 years or 5 years, and you say, hey, if we're sitting here 3 years or 5 years from today, what would you like to see have happen to feel good about your succession planning process? Well, I'd like to have the rising generation of leaders in a training program. I'd like to have an evaluation process. I would like to have a board of directors that can, whatever, or I met with a financial advisor and I know my number is X. Whatever those long-term plans are, that's what we want to do. So then if we say, okay, and then we list again the obstacles. And then the strategies. What are the strategies? Well, we're going to hire a consultant, to do leadership training, whatever the case may be. And the last in this roadmap that I have, the KPIs. We need specifics. There shouldn't be any arguments whether we did or we didn't do this. And what did Archimedes say? If you can't measure, it doesn't exist. Right? A little extreme, but I like to quote Archimedes. It's a joke. Thank you very much. All right. So if that's what we want to do in 3 to 5 years, then you say, okay, what can we do over the next 12 months? We're not trying to boil the ocean. What can we do in the next 12 months to move us a bit closer? Okay, well, for instance, I'm working with a big company in Chicago. It's family-owned and long debt-owned business. They have no idea what they need financially. So they're going to start interviewing financial advisors over the next year. That's just one example, right? And then once again, we list what are the obstacles we have to overcome. And then we put, again, the KPIs to it. And then lastly, another terrific book called The 12-Week Year. We should all plan our lives around 12 weeks. Long enough to get stuff done, but short enough to keep your eye on the ball. And what's that old saying? If you want to improve something, measure it. My comment is, if you want to improve something exponentially, measure it and have somebody report out. Right? And so when I say, when I work with families and closely on business owners, I say, okay, what are we going to do in the next 90 days? Well, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. Okay, and who's going to be the champion? You don't have to do it all. Who's going to be the champion that's going to report here in 90 days? And I got to tell you, when we meet in 90 days, it's amazing how stuff gets done. And I will tell you, this is another distinction. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back. You've got to take action. It's one thing to have a succession plan, but it's the process and the execution that is critical. And if you take anything away from that, this is not an event, it's a process. And then since I quoted all these books, the last one, another terrific book called The All Blacks. The All Blacks are the world's greatest rugby team. They make the New England Patriots look bad. Of course, as the Pittsburgh Steelers, whatever we do to make the Patriots look bad, I'll do that. There's a quote in there by Mandela. And they said, vision without action is merely a dream. Action without vision is merely passing time. But vision with action can change the world. And I'm telling you, that's the distinction here. We've got to plan and take action. So, thank you. The one thing I will say is, I do have a succession solutions scorecard. If you want to sort of evaluate, it's 25 questions, you can score 1 to 4. If anyone wants a copy of it, go on my website, send me an email, or around here, give me my card. Give me your card, and we'll go from there. Thank you very much.